It was, how did people treat lepers? How did people treat those that would have a dangerous, contagious disease?
When AIDS and HIV became very visible to members of Congress, as an elected body, I think Congress was slow and very slow to act.
In the early days, the response was, some people were, if it was children, if it was IV, it became a list. And I used to talk about the list. If you got it because you were born with it, that's one thing, babies and, you know. If you got it because you were an IV drug user, that's not so bad. If you got it because you had unprotected sex, but if you were gay, lesbian, let's not talk about transgender. Oh, that's the whole throwaway. The problem is, who do you throw away in your community? And because each group kept making it the other person's issue, it kept growing. The elephant kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And even today, when you look at statistics and it want to point at women or gay men or no. It's all of our issue. I don't care what the percentage is. The question is, who do you throw away? My answer is nobody.
Because we first saw this virus in the gay community and the drug community, people didn't want to deal with that. People did not want to talk about, their daughters and their sons, particularly their sons who were gay, were dying of HIV. So they were dying of cancer or whatever. People did not want to address homosexuality. I mean, that was just something that the black community did not talk about. The church definitely did not talk about it. Now, it was not something that we didn't know about, because every family, every black family, has someone who's been addicted to drugs or alcohol and someone who was gay. So that wasn't a new phenomenon. What was new was that we were not about to talk about it in public.
And then you're going to see some churches where the preachers would, from the pulpit, call out HIV as God's sin. And that it's hard to generalize and say it was all good or it was all bad. It just was very mixed. And part of it had to do with fear, part of it had to do with compassion, part of it had to do with whether people's lives were personally touched. I think that when your life is personally touched by this epidemic is when you change your perspective. Because it's one thing to see those people, it's another thing to see your Uncle Tom or your Aunt Sally or your son or your daughter.
I remember having such a wonderful relationship with an old gentleman who was actually in prison for 40 years, and he had murdered someone in his younger life. The man became infected, and no one was sure if he was infected during his time in prison or before he went to prison, but he'd been there 40 years. And the only thing he wanted to do was to be able to go home and see his family again and die at home. But because of his murder conviction, they would not allow him to go home. And it touched me so much that I wanted to help him to, at least in prison, feel as if he were home. Now, I know that sounds like a difficult thing, but sometimes just offering people a bit of normalcy helps. The man's disease was so severe that at that time his flesh was beginning to fall from his bones. And the prison officials, the officers as they're called, and the medical staff, no one wanted to go in his cell. So you can imagine this man knowing that he's dying, and no one wants to touch him, and no one wants to be near him. And I could feel that from him. He would hide underneath a blanket and peek out And so all you saw was this skeletal person with big eyes. And his eyes were just so large from fear. And I told him that I would not allow him to die alone. So I would walk into his cell every day that I came to the prison. And I would sit with him and I would cradle him and I would rock him. And I would tell him that he wasn't alone. I would tell him that he was important. I would tell him that I loved him. I would sing to him. I would let him know that though he may feel like he was alone, there was at least one person. And even though I could not get him out of prison because of his murder conviction, that I would not allow him to die alone. And the last day, the officers told me they didn't want me to go into his cell. They said that the disease was so severe, they were sweeping all day flesh off the floor. And that I shouldn't waste my time with him. He was going to die anyway. And I told them I would not allow this man to be alone. So they opened up the cell door, and I walked into that cell door. And I sat on his bed, and I held this man who, according to the records, weighed over 230 pounds when he came in. He now weighed 75 pounds, and so it was like I was holding a child. And I rocked this man in my arms, and I sang to him, and he died. That touched me. It still moves me when I tell you the story. Because so often, when we don't understand things, we mistreat people. So often, people are in pain and they need to be touched and they want to just hear, I'm human. I'm human. Somebody cares about me. And they left that man all alone. And I thank God that I was there. I happened to be there at that particular time. And I was able to at least let him know that he was not alone.